Hello, church. It's good to be back with you again today as we continue our study in equipping the church to evangelize in the 21st century. So glad you're back. Pray that these videos are helpful for you to help you to lead people to Christ, all for God's glory and the increase of His kingdom. All right. Well, we are in the coronavirus, as we know, and again, I just want to remind us. We have to find new ways to evangelize. So get that phone out. Start talking to people over the phone. Have Bible studies over the phone. Use that mail if you have to and send things out to them. And use that computer. And if you find that these videos are helpful, I have many more videos on my channel here. Just go to YouTube videos and type in Saving Souls in the 21st Century. And you will find both of my channels. I have two, one with my picture and one with an S. The picture has newer videos on it, and the S has my older videos on it. I think that all be helpful to send to people and connect them closer to Jesus. All right. So I hope you got your Bible with you today and a pen so you can take some notes. And I hope you got this book, Saving Souls in the 21st Century. And if you don't have a copy of this, we'll tell you how to obtain that at the end of this lesson here. Okay. Remember, this workbook is not a substitute for the Bible. It's only to help lead people to the Bible. I want to make that very, very clear. All right. And in that workbook, you have a prayer list in chapter 1. And I hope you're using that. And if not, I hope you're still keeping a prayer list, praying for people every day for salvation. And again, the more people that we meet, the more people that we connect to, our neighbors, our friends, our family, people that are in our workplace, pray for these people every day. And this is going to change us, and it's going to change our thinking. As my good friend John Orr from Home Missions would say, we need to change the church's DNA. We need to start thinking differently. And if you start praying for these people of your world, these are the people of my world, every day it's going to change our thinking and how we react to these people and look at them and hopefully open up some opportunities to lead them to Christ. So keep praying for these people. All right, and just one more reminder. I want to remind you of my purpose. And again, Ephesians 4 talks about these gifts that God gave to the church, apostles and prophets. We have them in the New Testament. We can read the New Testament. We can see those gifts, how God had used these men to give us instruction on how to lead people to Christ, how the church ought to be structured, our worship, and just how Christians should live. We have those gifts today in our New Testament. All we have to do is read it. But we also have a few more on the list: evangelists, the pastors, and teachers. And since I am an evangelist, that is my job to what? To equip the saints for works of ministry for building up the body of Christ. So that's my job. My job is to equip you, and I take that very, very seriously. And I pray today that I'm doing a good job of that in these videos to help equip you to be ready to go out and reach the lost of this world. All right? Again, I want you to be a part of this army. We so many times thought that, well, we'll just hire a preacher or an evangelist and he'll do all the work for us, or the elders, and they'll be the ones that go out and reach people. And it's like, no, wrong thinking. This is all of our purpose as Christians. And we need to send out an army, and I want you to be a part of this army so that we can go out and reach people for Jesus. Because two people are a whole lot better than one, right? So we need you. So hope you're enlisted in this army. Okay. So we went through chapter 1, and this chapter is on reaching the lost in the workbook, and this was to motivate the Christian to go out and reach people for Jesus. Okay. So hope you're at that point. You're motivated. You're ready to go. All excited. Okay. Then you finally get to the point and say, okay, I'm motivated. I went out and built some friendships with some people, and I'm finally ready to study with somebody, and they're wanting to study. But here's the question: where do I take them? Well, that brings us to chapter 2, leading someone to Christ. Okay, and this is found on page 19. So, in our last couple of studies, we went through the first study there, and that was the sin problem. And what do we have to do? We have to bring the person down in a sense and get them to understand they have a problem. Okay? And what is that problem? It's sin. And what does sin do? It separates you from God. And that's a terrible, terrible place to be. To leave this earth apart from Jesus, you will be separated from God forever and ever and ever. God will just go away. Now, how will you survive if God leaves you for eternity? It's not good. It's not a place you want to go. So we need to show our students that they have a problem. Now, once they realize that, now we want to bring them up. And we want to show them the solution to the sin problem. And that's what we're discussing here in this study here. It's the grace-faith system. And we talked about this the last time we were together. Now, this is such a big study that I broke it up into 2 parts. So, we took this from Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8. And it says, "For by grace you have been saved through faith. It's not of yourselves. It's the gift of God." So here is the plan of salvation, all in basically one verse. And it's found in 3 words. The word grace, the word saved, and the word faith. And we're going to take those words, we took those last time we got together, and we broke them down. So, here's the first one. You have been saved. And what are we being saved from? Most people will say sin, and that is correct. But it's really the results that come from sin. What does sin bring? According to 1 Thessalonians, sin brings God's wrath, His anger. And sin's really bad, isn't it? It's a terrible thing. It's destroyed our world at every point. Sin is terrible. And God hates it. And so His wrath comes down. Jesus came to rescue us from His wrath, His anger. And the most vivid picture that I have of God's wrath coming down on sin is the cross. When Jesus hung there on the cross, according to Isaiah 53, God brought His wrath on Jesus. God did that to Him. And why? Because He had all of my sin. He had all of your sin. He had this whole world's sin on Him. And here comes God's anger, His wrath on Him. And guys, that's what every one of us deserve. Every single one of us. And Jesus came to save us from that. So we need to get our students to understand just how vitally important it is to be saved from God's wrath. And that's what Jesus did. Okay? Now, how were we saved? Well, we were saved by grace. Grace is what saves us. And how did we describe that last time? Well, we got into this word. It's a big word. It's called propitiation. Okay? And the word means to satisfy. Well, God sent His propitiation. Romans chapter 3, verse 25. He sent His propitiation. Who is that propitiation? It's Jesus. Jesus is God's satisfaction. God absolutely and unequivocally needs to be satisfied. How is His wrath satisfied against my sins? By Jesus. He's His satisfaction. And why Jesus? Why can't it be me? Why couldn't I satisfy God? Why couldn't you satisfy God? Because there was something different about Jesus. When He came down on this earth and He lived on this earth, He never sinned. Not one time. Not one time did He ever sin. He's different than you and me. We're contaminated with sin. He's that lamb without blemish. And because of that, God will accept His sacrifice. And so when Jesus dies on the cross, God is satisfied. His wrath against our sins is satisfied because payment has been made. And God's good with that. That's what saves us. So we don't save ourselves. Jesus saves us. We're saved by grace. We don't say, hey, Jesus, scoot over a little bit on the cross and let me pay for part of this. No, Jesus paid it all. That's what saves us. And that's what grace is. God's riches at Christ's expense. Okay? But then the question remains, how do I get a hold of God's grace? And that's the last part of this section of this verse in Ephesians 2:8. Through faith. So how do I get a hold of God's grace? Through faith. That's Romans chapter 5, verse 1 and 2. Very clear there. So the Bible says in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6, it's impossible to please God without faith. So what do I have to have? Faith to be pleasing to God. I certainly can't satisfy Him. Only Jesus can do that. But I must be pleasing to Him. And the way that I please Him is by faith. And when I please Him by faith, watch what happens. We come over here to Abraham, right? And we looked at Abraham in Genesis chapter 15, verse 6. And what do we find? The question is this: he was credited with righteousness. That's what the NIV says. That Abraham was credited with righteousness. So he's made righteous. But wait a minute. Who's the only person in the Bible that is righteous? It's only Jesus. So the only one that's righteous is Jesus, and He's not going to come until 1,800 years later. Yet Abraham was credited with righteousness when he did what? He believed. He had faith. And so Abraham in and of himself is not righteous. He's a sinner just like you and me. No one is righteous, not one. But he's credited with righteousness. And the credit comes from Jesus. God knows Jesus is coming. The check's in the mail. You see how it works? So when I put my faith in God, when I put my belief in God, I am credited with the righteousness that Jesus brought into this world. And when that happens, I am saved from God's wrath. And how was I saved? Through God's grace. Because my faith accessed God's grace, and I was saved. See how it works? It's pretty simple, isn't it? Here's the problem, though. There's still a whole bunch of pages left in this workbook. We've only covered 26 pages. We're on page 26. Why is there all these other pages? Because man has misdefined what biblical faith is. And that's the problem. See, you got to make sure you've got the right kind of faith. The world has the wrong kind of faith for the most part. And so we need to get into the Bible, find out what kind of faith I need to have so that I can connect to God's grace so I can be saved. And this is what we got to get across to our students. Let's go over here to Jesus here in Matthew chapter 7, verse 21 through 27. Sermon on the Mount. And what Jesus is going to do here is He's going to define what biblical faith is. And watch what He says. He says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven." Now, let me just throw this thought at you. If you say, "Lord, Lord," you're standing in front of Jesus and you say, "Lord, Lord." Do you not believe in Him? Sure you do. So you have faith. You have trust in Him. You believe in Him. But He says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven." Well, wait a minute. I thought all I had to do is have faith. I just had to acknowledge you, God. No, wait a minute. It's got to be more than that. Look at the rest of the verse. "But only he who does the will of my Father in heaven." You've got to do the will of the Father in heaven. It's got to be more than just a verbal acknowledgement of God. See, faith is an action word. It's both used in the Bible as a verb and a noun. And what do we get from that? We get action. It's got to move. It's got to have a pulse. It's got to move in the direction of God. Those are the people that enter the kingdom of heaven. The people that have the right kind of faith. Now look at verse 22. "Many will say to me on that day," what day is this? It's got to be Judgment Day, right? What are they going to say? "Lord, Lord, How many? Many. Lots of people are going to come with full confidence on Judgment Day and say, Lord, Lord, I know you. I know you by name. Oh, and by the way, let me give you my resume. I've even done some things in your name. And this is what they'll say. Do we not prophesy in your name? Drive out demons? Perform any miracles? You put whatever you want to on it. And then what does God say? Excuse me. Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. How can God not know them? Because apparently they have not done his will. They know him, but they haven't done what he has asked them to do. And so God says they're evildoers. And he's going to further explain this in the continuing story. Look at verse 24. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine, so you got it in the ear, right? And puts them into practice is like a wise man. See, the wise man actually not only heard God's words, but he put them into practice. There's that faith, there's that action, right? And he's called a wise man. And he built his house on the rock. So when the rains came down, the streams rose and blew and beat against the house. It did not fall because it had its foundation on what? On the rock. It weathered the storm. But look at verse 26. But everyone who hears these words of mine, got them in my ears. I know about it. I know about God, right? But does not put them into practice. He's like the foolish man who built his house on the sand. So this guy is foolish. He heard God's words. He acknowledged God, knows about God, but does not do what God asked him to do. See the difference? One is a biblical saving faith. The other is a faith, but it's, as we're going to see in the book of James, it's a dead faith. One will connect to God's grace, and one will not. One will lead you to salvation. The other will not. See the difference? When this man built his house on the sand, the rains came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. Some versions say its destruction was complete. We're talking about salvation here. Destroyed. Over. It's done. So there's a wise man. He weathered the storm of life. He made it through the journey, right? This journey of faith. Why was he wise? Because he put God's words into practice. What about this other guy? The other guy, down there in the hurricane zone, built this beautiful house on the sand. And what happened to him? His house fell with a great crash because he did not put God's words into practice. Again, it's not talking about house building, it's talking about salvation. And your salvation crashed because you did not have the right kind of faith. Look over here in the book of James. A man that lived many, many years ago named John Calvin believed that this book should not be in the Bible, the book of James, because of the words we're about to see. Unfortunately, this collection of words or this concept that we're about to read is not just found in James, it is throughout the Bible. And I don't know how he failed to see that. But watch what it says here. It says, what good is it, my brothers, if a man claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save him? Can that kind of faith save him? So he has faith, but he doesn't have any action. He doesn't have any works. That faith has no pulse. The question is, can that faith save him? Well, let's see. My friend Ed Wharton, teacher at Sunset School of Preaching, where I went to school at in Lubbock, Texas, he would always say this. If there's anything I remember of Ed, this is what I remember. He would always say, what kind of faith do you have? That old Texas draw, right? Up there in the panhandle. What kind of faith do you have? The point is this. He would always stress, you've got to have the right kind of faith. And we do. And that's what James is stressing. So watch the story he gives. Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. Okay, so we're coming in the church building and Here's this guy laying out here at the next to the church building, hardly has any clothes, and has no food. And here we are at Waxahachie here at the Brown Street Church of Christ. We have this big room full of food over here that we give to people. And I come up and I say to him, well, go, I wish you well, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about his physical needs. What good is it? I didn't do any action, right? I had a whole pocket full of money. I had all this food over here that we could have gave him, but I'm like, well, Lord, just pray for you inside. Hope you have a good day, and just move on. What good is that? Well, we all know the answer. It's no good. It didn't do anything for the guy, right? In the same way, faith by itself, if it's not accompanied by action, is what? It's dead. It's a dead faith. That kind of faith cannot connect to God's grace, and you cannot have salvation. Cannot have it. We need to have the right kind of faith. So, we don't want to have a dead faith, which many of our friends have, and what I had for a long time. I acknowledged God, but I didn't do anything with him. I need to have an active faith, based on God's word, going in his direction, that has a pulse, moving towards him. James is going to end it up here in verse 19 with, you believe there's one God. Okay? You acknowledge there's one God. Great, good, I'm proud for you. Even the demons believe that, and they shudder or they tremble. Right? The demons. Do the demons believe in God? Well, yeah, they used to live with God. They know what he looks like. Yeah, but do they obey him? No. Do they follow him? No. Does Satan follow him? No. Not at all. So here's these guys, they have faith in God. But they don't follow him. I have faith in God. And what am I trying to do? I'm trying to follow him. Do you see the difference? One has an active faith. One has a dead faith. One goes in the direction of God, and one does not. Still faith. One's dead. One's alive. One's a saving faith, and the other is not. See the difference? Get that across to your students. So, demons are not atheists. They believe in God, don't they? They do. It's the wrong kind of faith. Now we're going to go over to Romans chapter 4, verse 12 to just kind of show this one more time. We're going to use Abraham. And it says, and he is also the father of the circumcised who are not only circumcised, but also walk in the footsteps of faith our father Abraham had before he was circumcised. Paul here is using Abraham to show what faith is. It walks, it moves, and it moves in the direction of God. So, what do we find Abraham doing? Well, he was in the land of Ur, and God came to him and said, look, he called him, right? So by faith, Abraham being called obeyed and went out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. Okay? Now that's faith. Abraham put one foot in front of the other. So, we looked at this chart last time, right? How was Abraham credited with righteousness? He was credited with righteousness when he believed and put his faith in God, Genesis 15:6. Right? Where did that righteousness come from? It came from Jesus. He was credited with it. Okay? Now this is where our religious world loves to paint this picture. And they're going to stop right here. This is what they'll paint. Just acknowledge God. That's what Abraham did. He acknowledged God back there in Genesis 15:6. And God made him righteous. Credited him with righteousness. So he can go to heaven, right? Wait a minute. There's more to the story. Let's go over here in Genesis chapter 12. 12 comes before 15, right? And what do we find Abraham doing? When God told him to leave the land of Ur, what did he do? He picked up one foot, put it in front of the other, and he moved. He went. He went in the direction of God. He obeyed. So when Abraham was credited with righteousness in Genesis 15:6, why? Because he had faith. What kind of faith did he have? He had an obedient faith. That kind of faith will access God's grace. And that kind of faith will get us salvation. Do you see the point? Fortunately, our religious friends are leaving this part out. And we need to explain this and explain it well. Okay? All right. Now let's go over here and use one more example in the book of Hebrews, the Israelites. The Israelites, they left Egypt. They're coming out of slavery, and they're going to go towards the promised land. But it took them a while to get there, didn't it? In fact, not everybody made it. And watch what it says here in the book of Hebrews. It says, for whom having heard, rebelled, right? They heard God's words, right? But they rebelled. They didn't put God's words into action, right? So they're not the wise man. These people are the foolish man. And indeed, was it not all that came out of Egypt led by Moses? That's who it was. Now, whom was God angry for 40 years? There it is. God's wrath. Why does God's wrath come? Because you don't have faith to connect you to God's grace, right? And so here's his anger. Here's his wrath. Was it not those who what? Who sinned? Whose corpses fell in the wilderness? Go back there in the book of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and you read how many times that God just purposely put those people to death, killed them outright. And here's why. Because they're rebelling against God. They don't have the right kind of faith. And what happens when you don't have the right kind of faith? Verse 18. And to whom did God swear they would never enter his rest? They're not going to enter into God's rest because of why? They didn't obey. But watch what verse 19 says. So we see they could not enter because of unbelief. Now wait a minute. Did they not make it into God's rest because they didn't believe? Or because they didn't obey? What's the answer? Both. They come as a package. See, if you really believe, you're going to obey. And if you really don't believe, you're not going to obey. The two have to come as a package, and you can clearly see this in the King James Version. It brings the two words together. It comes as a package. Does that make sense? It sure does to me. You got it? Now we can go tell our friends and explain this to them, okay? All right. Now that we get it, and now you're taking your student to this point, they may start to think, you know what? Then that means that I've got to be perfect. And I've got to keep every single one of God's commands, and I have to be absolutely perfect. And we need to understand this. Faith never demanded perfection. You pick up this Bible right here. It's on my desk. You read about all of these people of this Bible. There's a bunch of them in here, right? How many of them were perfect? Not one of them. They were all failures. This Bible will tell you about their failures, right? In fact, I love what the book of Hebrews says, though. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 13 in the NIV. I like the way the NIV brings this out. It says, all these men were living by faith when they died. They weren't perfect. Abraham failed. Moses failed. Rahab failed. Joseph failed. David failed. All of them failed. None of them were perfect. But they kept going. So faith demands direction, not perfection. So here you got two guys. Two older men, and they're going to walk from, where are they going to walk from? They're going to go from Amarillo, Texas to Lubbock, Texas. Now, I've taken this drive many times, and it is 1 hour and 50 minutes in a car. Okay? Now, here these guys are, and what's going to happen when they walk? They're going to stumble, and that's our walk. Don't we stumble as Christians? Absolutely. So here you got these two guys, and they are on this track trying to go to Lubbock, Texas, and they both fall down. So that's what's going to happen. They're going to get tired, right? And we all fall, don't we? Yes, we do. So one guy, he falls down. He says, you know what? I'm done. I'm not going any farther. I quit. Is that faith? And then you got the other guy, he may fall 7 times, but he keeps getting back up. He gets back up the 8th time. Or is that faith? Which one is faith? It's the second one. Faith just keeps getting back up. And that's the book of 1 John. We'll eventually get there. After we've led someone to Christ, we'll discuss how we need to keep them in Christ. So get your student to understand this. They don't have to be perfect. They just have to keep going. And as long as they keep going, God will keep forgiving. Isn't that a beautiful story? That's good news for me because I fall, and so do you. And let your student understand that. All right. So that's the true faith. So do we get it? Can we put this package together? God did his part. That's grace. Sent Jesus down on this earth to die for us, right? We access that God's grace by faith. That's our part. And what's the result? It's salvation. Do you get it? There it is. It all works together. In fact, if you go to page 31 in your workbooks, you're going to see me basically take a piece of paper and try to put the whole Bible on it. So all these little arrows on the bottom here represents everyone who has sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, which is who? Everybody. Okay, so everybody's sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But some of those people had what? They had faith. Now, if those people have faith, doesn't matter if they're in the Old Testament or the New Testament, what are they going to connect to? God's grace. And what are they going to get? They're going to get heaven. But what about the people that didn't have faith, that sinned and fallen short of the glory of God? That saving faith. They're not going to connect to God's grace. And what are they not going to get? So what's left? Hell. That's right. Right behind my picture there. Total separation from God for eternity. That's what they're going to get. And I don't care where you're at in the Bible, the whole Bible works on this system. It's a grace, faith system, right? Now, here's what we need to understand. Even though this basic concept works throughout the Bible, faith is determined by what? So let's go over here to creation. God, just after creation, God told Noah to build an ark, right? God made a covenant with God, with Noah. He told him to build an ark. Now, if that Noah's got faith, what's he going to do? He's going to get that hammer out, he's going to build that ark, and he's going to take his feet and step on, right? So his faith is determined by covenant, this contract, this agreement that God made with Noah. Well, let me ask you a question. Are you building an ark in your backyard? No, I'm not. You know why? Because God didn't make that covenant with me. All right? Let's go a little bit farther. Let's go over here to Abraham. Here's Abraham, and he told him to go to the land of Ur and go to the promised land. If he has faith, his faith will be determined by that covenant that God made with him, that contract. Is anybody here leaving the land of Ur? Never even been to the land of Ur. And why? Because God didn't tell us that. Our faith is not determined by that covenant. Now, if you lived over here with the time of Moses, God took him to Mount Sinai, gave him, the 10 Commandments and about 600 ordinances and commands. And if they have faith, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to sacrifice animals. They're going to, build the temple, the tabernacle. They're going to worship. They're going to keep the Sabbath, things like that, because that is what God told them. Their faith is based on covenant. Let me ask you a question. Are you keeping the Day of Atonement like he told those people? Are you keeping the Passover? No. Are you keeping the Sabbath? Are you doing animal sacrifices? No. Have you ever been to the temple? No. Why? Because that covenant was not made to us. So the point is this: our faith must be determined by covenant. We are now under the new covenant. And this is what we're going to be studying in our next class. We're going to understand the concept of covenant. God is a covenant God. We are under the new covenant. So if I'm trying to find out what is my faith based on, it's based on covenant. Here's the problem. A lot of our religious worlds, they mix these covenants in with each other, make an absolute mess of religion, of Christianity, right, or so-called Christianity, and they're blending these things together, and it's just an absolute mess. So we need to know how to use our Bible, what part applies to us, what part does not, so I can have the right kind of faith, so I can connect to God's grace. Does that make sense? Yes, I hope so. All right. So, our faith is determined by covenant. We'll talk about that next time. So, do we get it? Yes, we got it. So, if you would like a copy of this workbook, book in Spanish, the workbooks are $15. Spanish books are $10. They've got the DVD video series with me sitting across a table, leading someone to Christ. And so these DVD series, this 24 lessons, is based off of the workbook, but it's not scripted. It's the real people. It's the real deal. If you'd like to get these videos, there's 12 hours of lessons on here. They are $25, and then the thumb drives are $10, and that's the PowerPoints that you are seeing here. So you can plug this into your computer and actually teach somebody that way. All kinds of different ways. If you are in need of any of that, please let me know. You can go to SaginawPreacher@yahoo.com. That is my website. You can also go to SavingSoulsToday.com. No, I'm sorry. Saginaw Preacher is my email. Saving Souls Today is my website. And you can also call the Brown Street Church of Christ at 972-937-8855 to get a hold of me or somebody, and they'll make the connections. But if you find any of this helpful, I hope you use it. And if not, just do something in evangelism to try to lead people to Christ. Hope you've been blessed. We'll see you next time as we continue to study God's Word.